Odanik, Adventure of the Sword of Magic in the World of Jyareynterniia, written by Orsat Stražičić. What would you do if the world you lived in was unstable? Not unstable in any emotional sense of the way, but unstable in the structural sense. What if the world you lived in was wrecked with constant cataclysms, and because of that, there was barely any land left in that vast blue world, and the land that still stood seemed to be twisted, and on top of all that, deteriorating more and more as the time inevitably passed. It is indeed hard to say, am I right? Some people would break completely in both emotional and physical sense, and would just plunge the fate of that world into chaos. For why not? It was already doomed, and going to be destroyed anyways. So what was the harm? Why would one even bother to live in that world? Why would one even bother to procreate in that world? Why would one or anyone do anything of note or of importance in that doomed world? That was the question, was it not? One part of the said world, if one were to take a look at the map, looked as if though a huge devastating tornado hit it. Some would even dare say that some unknown destructive energy shaped it into a desolate and barren land of spiky curved peninsulas, which then connected themselves to a desert land of Zmyarnian, to a ever so deforested forest of titans, and to the mountains of giants in the north. The curved peninsulas contained the ruined cities, and they were called ruined Vitezova and ruined Barzuna, which occupied the first peninsula on the west side, and also there was a snake-shaped tower of Azarm north of them, which was relatively new and, more importantly, active in the structure of Zmyarnian society, which stood as a terrifying religious landmark. The ruined Vitezova and the ruined Barzuna seemed to be the cities of an ancient variety, and if one were to determine their age, the one would be at a loss, for some scholars dated the structures to be thousands of years old, while the others argued that their age could not be more than 100 years old. The cataclysms that plagued the world made it almost impossible to tell, for sure, the age of the structures, but one thing was for sure. There was no life in those ruins, and one could say with utmost certainty that never again there would be life in those ruins. In addition, as of now, no expedition had been made when it came to that territory, for traveling via land or sea to those places was extremely dangerous. There were six curved peninsulas in total, and the second one was empty of civilization, new and old. And it connected itself to the forest of titans, where, as the name would imply, titans lived, and titans themselves were considered to be the animals of a very large stature, and so were feared by many, but Zmyarnian cared very little about them, or about their stature, and thus they waged war on them, just as they waged war on everyone else. The third curved peninsula contained the Kana ruins, and it also connected itself to the forest of titans. Kana ruins suffered the same fate as the previously mentioned ruins, and its history indeed was lost, and some would even dare say lost forever and never to be retrieved again. The fourth, the fifth, and the sixth curved peninsulas connected themselves to the mountains of giants, and as the name would imply, there would be giants there, but truth be told, the giants were no more. Only the empty forts of the giants remained, along with a system of caves called Jyareynterniia. Many just steered clear from them, and across the mountains stood the island of Bakarakuda nation, which also resisted the force of Zmyarnian. The sixth peninsula contained cities of ruined Rassonia and ruined Skroz, and next to it stood the very dangerous island of Doku Blutha's stone parasites, and that island indeed stood off limits to everyone unless they wanted to invite absolute misfortune to themselves and all those around them. For these parasites were no joke, and they devastated mountains if left unchecked, with their brown, worm-like bodies that stood decorated with a round head, a green eye, and small, deformed hands. So I ask again, why would anyone want to live in this deteriorating and downright dangerous world? Many had found reason or reasons to continue on living, for life stood as something sacred and worth fighting for, and worth protecting. Land of Aqualos, nations of Bakrakuda and Lywada strongly believed that. However, the Lywada nation took it to the extreme, for they held strong moral values when it came to life in general, and of course that included their kind of righteousness for all that mattered to them, and of course they strictly valued every aspect, every action that ensured their survival. Therefore, the so-called normal residents of Lywada abandoned the nihilistic outlook on life completely, and they swore to destroy the ones that still held onto the said nihilistic doctrine, for it was considered to be harmful to everyone, and those that stood righteous and normal did their best to eradicate those who would stand in the way of life, and so the great war against Zmyarnia raged on for decades, for in their eyes Zmyarnia was exactly that, nihilistic. Nihilistic doctrine was a philosophical belief that life was without objective meaning, purpose, or value. It stated that morality was baseless, that knowledge was uncertain, and that existence itself was ultimately insignificant. It suggested that no inherent truth or order existed in the world, in the universe for that matter. It branched into many spheres, and one of those spheres was an existential nihilism, the most common form, that was asserting that life had no meaning or value whatsoever. Then we had moral nihilism, that viewed that nothing was moral or immoral, and that nothing was right or wrong, for in the mind of a nihilist, those were all inventions of beings that could think. Epistemological nihilism was the belief that all knowledge was possibly false, or that we could not truly know anything at all. Cosmic nihilism was the idea that the universe was vast and completely indifferent to all life that resided within it. Optimistic nihilism stood as the strangest, for it was suggesting that if nothing mattered, then one was free to create their own meaning and thus enjoy life whichever way they wanted, and that notion stood as the most dangerous one of all. Nihilism was often misunderstood as pure pessimism by the scholars and common folk alike of this world, but it fundamentally acted as a framework that negated the necessity of predefined meanings. Therefore, often was leading to a sense of absolute freedom or profound despair. In many cases, it brought misfortune to those who practiced the said doctrine and to those who found themselves in the way of the said doctrine or in the vicinity of the same. Zmyarnia stood dangerous, for it did not value life, it just valued their desires, and they opted to do whatever they wanted, no matter whom or what got hurt. They knew that the world was doomed, so, in their mind, speeding up the process was no big deal, and that was what united the nations in the battle against them, the war against them. It was not quite clear who started the war first. Many blamed Zmyarnia, while Zmyarnia blamed all else for obstructing their crucial needs. But one thing was for sure and clear: Zmyarnia stood as a destructive force, and thus it assimilated the neighboring countries, nations, and city-states. Zmyarnia was still expanding to this day and still spreading its influence and their way of living, which threatened to destroy all life. For their way of life only bred degeneracy, and once lush greenery, which was present within it, was reduced to wastelands under their unnatural rule. The righteous Lywada still resisted their expansion, but unfortunately stood very close to defeat, for Zmyarnia used a lot of sneaky tactics, and their forces seemed to be on the verge of breaking the defense line of forts that served as a border between Lywada and Zmyarnia. Because of that, nobles of Lywada schemed to have Akvalos join the fight, which was another land still untouched by the wickedness of Zmyarnia, but still reluctant to join the fight completely, for war was not in their nature, adventure was, and therefore many adventurers found themselves caught up in the war, which was very much real and very close to Akvalos, not because they wanted for Akvalos to join the fight, but because they enjoyed the thrill of the adventure. One of those adventurers was Grezhith Odanik. He was a human with very strange features, such as having grey skin tone, turquoise color hair with strings of grey in it, clear blue eyes, and peculiar dark scars on the right side of his face. He was athletic, with a large and imposing build. He wore a dark color shirt, which was decorated with black patterns and a red gem in the middle of it. He also wore black pants that stood fastened with a leather belt, and he had hard black boots that were made to withstand tough terrains, because adventuring in most cases consisted of traversing through the said tough terrains. He indeed stood as an atypical human when it came to humans of Zmyarnia, for the humans He indeed stood as an atypical human when it came to humans of Lywada, for the humans of Lywada were generic in every way, and of a same white skin tone. Grezhith also had a large sword on his back, which was a two-handed sword. One could describe it as a Zweihänder, large in size and with a simple straight crossguard. However, this one was quite peculiar, for it had extra angled spikes on the crossguard, a blue and turquoise decorated fuller, which was a longitudinal groove or channel on the blade that reduced weight while increasing stiffness of the said blade. It also had sword breaker features on the sides of the blade and two straight points that were also decorated with a blue and turquoise color. It was a strange sword indeed, and many craved that sword, but as of now, only the warrior by the name of Grezhith could wield it, for the sword had chosen him for the task at hand, here in the grassy Lywada, nation of seemingly endless green plains. Grezhith at the moment had found himself in one of the fort towns of Lywada, which was called Jyareynterniia, and it was situated on the shore of the great Zechrit lake on the west side of the land. He came here seemingly to offer his services for the war effort and to score some coins, of golden variety preferably, for they held the highest value in this world. Fort towns of Lywada, as the name implied, were towns made of stone blocks, large stone blocks, and were enclosed by massive walls and defense towers that contained cannons, as well as the archers that possessed a deadly skill of accuracy. The sight of these forts could only induce wonder and awe, and it was the sole reason why Lywada was still able to resist. For these walls were not easy to breach, even though they stood ancient and mystical and of an unknown builder or builders. Many believed that it was the giants that built them long ago. No one stood sure, for there were no written accounts of that event or events, but judging by the size of the stone blocks, only giants had the required strength to bring them here and thus use them. And now they stood as one of the great wonders of the world, and within those walls, a thriving communities were built that very soon combined themselves into a great alliance that would soon call themselves the United Forts of Lywada. But later on, just the name Lywada was used, minus the United Forts. The rest of Lywada consisted of a main fort town that was also named Lywada, a line of forts which bordered with Zmyarnia, and the names of the fort towns of this Vasetuje Vosetropa line were Ideviru, Ruina, Etar, and Shulforgie. Somniumach resided in the north of Lywada, Krocha in the east near the great Kolos Lake, and across the said great lake stood the infamous Put region, in the northeast where the dreaded Cave of Silence was situated, and within it the monsters resided, and even adventurers avoided going there, for only those who suffered from insanity would venture there, into that cave of the said the monsters. That cave, that dreaded cave, held within a complete darkness, and no sounds whatsoever, and again, I repeat, only those who were mad would enter. Governor of that region was Psyto Kaidbach, a loyal servant of Lywada, who after managing the region for so long lost his mind, and thus he disappeared within the said cave, never to be seen or heard from again. Across the dreaded cave stood the island that contained another snake tower of Zmyarnia, called Ozgen, a terrifying reminder that Zmyarnia was slowly surrounding everyone and everything. Lywada also contained two major islands in the east and northeast, and they contained towns of Michena, Michecha, Minirai, and Sobalong. King Victorianus ruled over Lywada, and even though all hope was fading, he was not about to give up the fight. And at this moment, it was one of his trusted subjects by the name of Gaifman Grachjal who interviewed and inspected the new recruits, and that was who Grezhith was meeting at this very moment. Gaifman was a tall human who wore a long robe and a hat of the clergy, for he belonged to an order of the divine life, and he answered to the king, for the king was also the head of the Church of Life. Upon entering, Grezhith bowed at the esteemed Gaifman, and thus he said, "Greetings. I was told that you're in charge of the recruitment." "Ah, you were told right. I am Gaifman Grachjal of the Divine Life Order. Come on in, sit down, make yourself comfortable. I do not bite, but the couch does. Sometimes, not today." "I hope not. I would hate to pick up unwanted passengers on my garments. I just had them washed." "Ha ha, not to worry. I keep it clean. I take huge pride in that, as you can see around yourself. I very much abhor the uncleanliness." "I sure hope so. I do not trust those who do not keep their living space or workspace clean. This place is very clean. Too clean, if you ask me. Too clean is not something that exists in my vocabulary. Now, take a seat, warrior. I assume that you are a warrior, based on your weapon, physique, and a scar." "A scar, yes. That story is not really a pleasant one, but every scar tells a story, and it is a proof that a struggle as a warrior is very much real. I am very proud of my scars. Are you proud of yours?" Gaifman ignored the question, and he motioned for Grezhith to sit down. Grezhith then sat down on the grand couch, which was adorned with golden patterns and intricate designs, and the two fancy-looking grand cushions seemed to be somewhat glued or sewn to it, and to him that was suspicious, as well as the strange smell that emitted from it, as if though something had died on it, or maybe something dead was residing within it. Grezhith suppressed his disgust, and thus he locked eyes with Gaifman that stood in front of him, in this somewhat big interview room that screamed of luxury, and it attested to falsehood of clergy choosing the path of the poor, because nothing here resonated with being poor, and Geifman himself wore garments that an ordinary man could only dream about. And the interview room was located in a building that was of newer kind and owned by Geifman, and thus it stood separated from the rest of the large town structures that had massive doors as well as massive windows. Geifman collected himself, and thus he said, "So, you wish to join our valiant soldiers, do you?" "Yes, I do. I would very much like to be a part of the amazing Green Army of Lywada. Their uniforms hold so much style and class. The uniforms alone merit anyone to join. I'm tired of my old colors anyway." That is good to know. I need to ask this. Are you religious? Do you believe in the serenity of the afterlife? I believe that religion separates people while faith unites them. As for the afterlife, I'm sure that I do not know if it exists in that sense of the way, if it even exists for that matter. Interesting response. Can you tell me about yourself? Do you have any war experience? As a matter of fact, I do. I spent some time in Bakarakuda Nation, and I was awarded with the Golden Amulet for an excellent service and for being able to root out the traitors within the ranks of their military. Is that right? You seem to be more than just a simple warrior. That is interesting. What can you tell me about this nation of Bakarakuda? I'm a stranger when it comes to them. They're tough, they're resilient, but corruption grasps even the toughest of nations, and they firmly believe that corruption deserves only one punishment. What punishment would that be? Death, in the most brutal way possible, by crushing the skull of the one that succumbed to corruption and thus betrayed the interests of the nation, without mercy or possibility of pardon. That is harsh. Do you approve of such savagery? Oh, they're not savages. Their attire is much different from what you and I wear. They do not believe in the trinkets that provide only superficial splendor. They're simple people, but smart. They learn from their past mistakes, and they realized very quickly that past does indeed matter, and that those who ignore it are doomed to repeat it. Men wear short, sleeveless, rectangular tunics, often made from the wool of their native fauna. They do not enclose their feet completely. They wear open sandals made of leather, or they just walk barefooted. Men also wear belts or sashes in order to connect their tunics. Short trousers were sometimes worn, only sometimes. Women wear a one-piece wraparound dresses or skirts that are then fastened at the shoulders with pins. They also wear shawls or cloaks over the dresses, and sashes are used to tie garments at the waist. Geifman listened intently, and he realized that the warrior in front of him was not just a warrior, but also a scholar of sorts, and that combination was indeed very valuable, for an intellectual person that could fight and was of the warrior kind was a very much sought-out beast. And because the explanation of Grezhith went on for so long, Geifman thus interjected by saying, "Wow, you sure know a lot about them." "I do, and I'm not finished. Places over there get named only after major events. Places with no name, or just plainly nameless places, are common until someone worthy arrives, and that place is usually named after someone who was very noticeable in that moment of time. That is why they named a place, a town to be precise, after me, the town of Grezhith. They also called me the Great Uncoverer." This is also very fascinating. But can I see the amulet? The amulet is a trinket, is it not? Of course you can. It is one of my more prized possessions. And it is not a trinket, but a reward and a proof of my valor. And to tell you the truth, was quite easy to figure out who the traitors were. Really? And how so? By all means, do enlighten me. The missing people, botched missions. What do they all have in common? That is the main question. I would not know. Why would I know why Lywada is failing? I think you know. I think you would know. I think that you do know. You just gave me another reason to suspect you. I beg your pardon? I have no idea what you are insinuating. I am Ranzieri. Does that ring a bell? Should it? I have no idea who that person is. I'm the one asking the questions here, and not, how do you know that Ranzieri is a person? Slip of a tongue is a marvelous thing. Do you also know that he has a concerned father who pleaded his son not to join the war effort? Do you know that his son was last seen in this town? I assure you, you're wrong. Whatever it is, you're wrong, and you would love that, would you? Many capable warriors came here, never to be seen again. I'm looking at you, and I ask you this. Where are they? You are capable. Too capable, in fact. We do not need people like you. We need less competent ones. Those who do not ask too many questions. Those who do not snoop around. Those who do not question authority. I'm sure you do. I've seen you glancing at the wall beside us. Your secrets are there, and they are about to be exposed. Uncovered, in fact, by the uncoverer. Besides, your eyes betray you, because you can see the red within them. You are one of the corrupted ones. Wrong again. You sure are a troublemaker. Time to eat, my dear Grich. Who? Soft rumble resonated from the couch. Then the fancy cushions formed eyes out of them, and then a roar echoed throughout the room. And one thing was for sure, Grezhith was sitting on a couch mimic, and that mimic just showed its sharp teeth. Grezhith leaped from the couch, for he had suspected that the foul odor that he felt before was nothing more than a bad breath, and now his suspicions were confirmed. A mimic was a shape-shifting monster that disguised itself as an inanimate object, a treasure chest, or a door in order to lure unsuspecting prey. When touched, the mimic attacked using sticky substance to hold its victim in place, and then would proceed to use powerful and deadly bite. These creatures stood as solitary ambush predators. They were often found in dungeons and ruins, and it was there that they remained motionless until the unsuspecting meal arrived. This mimic was absent of sticky substance, and it seemed to be somewhat domesticated, for Geifman seemed to be able to command it, and it seemed that the couch disguise was a perfect disguise for this mimic, who was not malnourished in the least, but even so, attacked because his master had ordered so. His master also revealed his true form, for he stood different, corrupted, and his features became more animalistic, bird-like to be precise. His bird-like face had grey, yellow, and black color, and his unnatural-looking dark eyes were riddled with red spots across the whites of his eyes, and these spots, in Grezhith's opinion, represented a much deeper and darker corruption of a magical kind, which also stood of an unnatural kind. The corruption of Geifman ran so deep, and he even adopted the colors of his robe that went against the teachings of Lywada, such as orange and pink, and even that was revealed in this moment. Indeed, he handled the recruitment, and he would dispose of the capable ones. His pet mimic would do the disposing by eating the unsuspecting recruits whole along with their equipment. Grezhith was quick to draw his sword and plunge it into one of the eyes of the mimic, who produced a very loud shriek. That shriek alerted the soldiers that were walking by the building in which the battle took place, and thus they barged in with no questions asked. The soldiers in question wore matching green tunics over armors, creating a sense of a single organized force. Their armors included scale and mail. The leader of the said group of soldiers wore a different kind of outfit, for his medieval-like armor had decorative accents, which were indeed decorative elements, of scaly texture, as well as segmented pieces of green clothing. That particular armor in question was designed to be more menacing, with metal pieces of, one would say, ornate designs. Basically, the armor in question was a mix with metal highlights on the chest plate with visible heavy green cloak. They entered the room, and they quickly realized what the situation was, and very soon they directed their attacks at the roaring couch mimic and monstrous Geifman, who held a spherical pulsing crimson object in his feathery hands, and he threw it at his attackers. The spherical object in question produced a large mouth filled with sharp wedge-shaped teeth, and bit the head of one of the soldiers, and the said soldier tried frantically to remove it, but to no avail, for his head was quickly crushed along with his metal helmet, and the creature proceeded to attack the second soldier, who quickly impaled it through the mouth. The creature stood defeated, and the soldier in question confronted the disheveled, fleeing Geifman, who was not bothered much by the said soldier, for Geifman had caused some kind of energy blast at the soldier, and the said soldier was pushed aside. Geifman was about to escape through the door, when a two-pointed blade pierced his back and exited through his chest. The strike was lethal, for it pierced his rotten, evil heart, and Geifman crumbled to the ground. Grezhith then turned around, and he witnessed the gruesome scene where one of the soldiers was chomped by the dead couch mimic. The remaining soldiers quickly gathered themselves and questioned the warrior that stood in front of them, and he quickly explained the situation, and thus he produced a scroll which detailed his mission parameters, and thus, following the said parameters, he executed the said mission. One of the soldiers knew about the guild of adventurers, and he even saluted the warrior in front of him by saying, "The heroes are calling your name," for he had heard of them from a colleague, who at one point was the adventurer of the guild himself. After the official investigators were brought in, the matter was quickly resolved, and the traitor's body quickly disposed of. It was determined that Geifman, a false loyal servant to the king, was an enemy agent, and his living quarters revealed a lot of secrets that would very much help the war effort. One of them was a secret passage that led deep underground. Grezhith's mission was done, and one of the soldiers jested that he would receive even more coins from the king because of the discovery, but Grezhith laughed at the notion, and he calmly stated that his mission was not yet done, for the motto of the Guild of Adventurers was duty before money, and as well as honor before money, and Grezhith's honor did not let him leave just yet. This secret still remained unsolved, and he ventured in, much to the protest of the investigators, but even so, a few soldiers followed him in, for they felt mighty with him beside them. Going down the steps into the darkness, Grezhith was about to light his path with the stone of light, which he carried with him, but suddenly the whole tunnel lit up with fire spirits that seemed to be trapped within some strange contraptions on the wall that looked somewhat like enclosed metal lanterns, and now the length of the said tunnel was visible, for not far in the distance there seemed to be an open door. Grezhith took a deep breath. He turned to the soldiers that followed him, and thus he calmly said, "Stay on your guard. We do not know what lies ahead, but whatever it is, do not lose courage. Steady your mind, and most importantly, keep on fighting." Soldiers that followed him nodded in acknowledgement, and thus they all entered the room that stood in front of them, after passing through the corridor made of stone, and within the said room they found an irregular pentagon-shaped mirror. The mirror in question was indeed very peculiar, with two protruding small irregular-shaped pillars on the top corners of the said mirror's wooden frame. On the top center of it stood an intricate decoration that almost looked like a face of a monster, with red eyes and sharp wedge-shaped teeth. A bit below it stood a bat-like decoration that was also of a monstrous kind, for no bat looked like that in actual nature. After the bat-like decoration, the pentagon-shaped mirror surface was visible, with a point looking downwards, and below it stood a rock-like formation, which also stood as a foundation of the said mirror. That rock-like formation seemed to resemble big grotesque arms of a monster. Grezhith and the soldiers of Lywada gazed at the mirror, and the confusion plagued them, for there was nothing else in the room, no doors, no furniture, just that huge mirror, and the reflection that it produced was normal, and the surface of that mirror was just a sturdy reflective glass. A looking glass, one would say. Suddenly, upon a touch of the looking glass, the two protruding small irregular-shaped pillars lit up with fire spirits, and these fire spirits seemed to be unhealthy, tortured even, for their flames seemed to be subdued, and one would even dare say dying. The surface of the mirror turned purple, and strange whirlpools formed within it, followed by huge demonic red eyes, along with a mouth that had a shape, outline of a grotesque, monstrous-looking bat. Grezhith and the soldiers of Lywada stood ready to fight, for their swords were already present in their hands. In that moment, the mirror spoke, and thus, in a gruff voice, it said this: "I am Mrorgul. What I reflect happens. Be careful, you fools. Be careful." "I'm not afraid of you, you monster." That soldier of Lywada was here, in this room, on a mission, and that mission had no place for fear. Thus the foolish soldier recklessly stood in front of the mirror, taunting it, and he saw his reflection within it. No big deal. Am I right? Wrong. For his reflection within the mirror started to change, and as it changed, so did the soldier, because he got transmutated into a slug-like being, and then the said head decoration of the mirror bent down and devoured him along with his equipment. Grezhith then averted his gaze, and thus he loudly exclaimed, "Do not look at the demonic mirror. Whatever you do, avert your gaze." "How can I fight it without looking at it?" "Just do not look at the mirror. We need to improvise. We need to think of a better way to fight it." "It is easier said than done, warrior. We need our eyes." But even so, they stood out of the reach of the monster, and they refused to look at its glassy surface. Nothing happened, for it seemed that as long as they were out of the monster's reach and not looking at the glass surface, they would be fine, for the mirror apparently had no ability to move beyond its station, which was the far end of the room. Then the decoration of a monster's bat-like creature attacked the second soldier, and it drew him into the range of the mirror. The head decoration of the said mirror once again bent down and bit the soldier on the head, and as it rose up, it swallowed the said soldier whole. The soldier of Lywada got eaten thus far. 2 soldiers of Lywada got eaten thus far, and the situation at hand became that more serious. For this creature, or a magical object as some would say, because it was a living mirror, had a variety of attacks. Grezhith once again yelled, trying to give the soldier some courage, and thus he said, "Damn it, stay focused. This thing must have a weak spot, and the mirror surface is the obvious one. We need to reach it. We need to break it." The third soldier completely froze up. He got closer to the mirror in awe of the confusion, and as his eyes were closed, the demonic mirror clobbered him to death with its monstrous arms made of stone, for he stood too far from its mouth. Grezhith had no choice but to approach the said mirror on his own, as it retracted its stone arms, and before the monster's head could bend down and kill him, he slammed his sword into the surface of the mirror, and it cracked. The head decoration of the mirror then produced a horrible scream, and the arms of the mirror became active again, and as they both tried to slam into the warrior who cracked the said mirror, he ducked down just in time as one of the soldiers of Lywada yelled for him to duck down. Two arms made of stone cracked the mirror even further, and the agony of the said mirror was more than evident, but it did not stop, and it continued to fight, even with the glass surface of the mirror destroyed. Grezhith then had an idea, and as he was about to implement it, he said, "Distract the arms. I think I know how to extinguish the life of this monster." The brave soldiers of Lywada understood the task, and in that moment they confronted the stone arms, and even though they damaged their weapons, they continued to strike them, hoping that they would turn them into rubble. In that moment, Grezhith climbed on the side of the mirror, and first he had to fight off the bat-like decoration before he could cut off the protruding small irregular-shaped pillar on the top corner of the mirror's wooden frame. As he did that side of the mirror just stopped functioning, and the stone arm just fell down to the floor. During that time, the rest of the soldiers chopped off the second stone arm, making it utterly useless, and then one of the soldiers did to the other irregular-shaped pillar the same what Grezhith did. He destroyed it, and the demonic mirror crumbled, revealing yet another passage behind it. Soldiers of Lywada cheered as they won the battle, but the warrior Grezhith wasted no time. He entered the passage, and it led to another room, and to his abject dismay, he saw a disfigured owl-like creature with what seemed to be a decorated battle shield fused to the arm. The shield had a purple, blue, and grey color foundation. It was irregular in shape with pointy edges, and also it had yellow, red, and green patterns, along with a purple heart-like shape with a black sword in the middle of that said heart-like shape. That was an insignia of the Guild of Adventurers, and this owl-like creature, that also had human-like features, which was chained to the wall by its remaining healthy hand and feet, was a missing adventurer, and there was a reward offered by the guild for finding him, and the reward was 2,000 gold coins. Grezhith cared very little about the reward in this moment, and in an excited voice, he exclaimed, "Strigofor, is that you? How did you get down here? Hold on, I will set you free." Strigofor was agitated in that moment, and his joy of being found was overshadowed by the realization that yet another prisoner might get released along with him. Strigofor's eyes, from which one had the red sclera, vertical slit, for an iris, and other that had purple sclera and horizontal slit for an iris, gazed into the corner, and thus he maniacally exclaimed, "Be careful! Shipahuruk is here!" "You got to be joking me." "I'm afraid not. He's here. He's here. Do not let him escape. Do not dare let him escape." Out of the corner of the room came a purple-robed shape, who also wore a massive purple hat of a tall variety with conical and pointed features present, and also with a very wide brim from which long green ears protruded. Shipach Uruch, a wanted spellcaster with 1,000 gold coins bounty on his head, was here in front of Grezhith. Shipach Uruch's face betrayed no emotion, for it was covered with a pinkish scarf and also presented itself as an eyeless black void. His 4 long green fingers on one hand were ready for action, and these fingers started to spark up as he charged his magical attack, and thus in his raspy voice he said, "It seems that I can thank you for my freedom, warrior. I indeed thank you." Still chained, Strigofor was out of himself. Thus he yelled with all of his might, and thus he maniacally exclaimed, "My friend, do not let him escape." "The reward for my capture must be tempting. I know, but let me go, and we can avoid bloodshed. I am willing to leave without a fuss, because I owe you, and this is not about the coin. My friend Strigofor can take it all can take all of it. I have a score to settle with you. As if your kind would pass the opportunity to get rich, and you really do not remember me, do you now? I'm in no mood for games, warrior. I am not playing. We were children, and we trusted you. We went through one hell only to be plunged into another by you, you sick, demented bastard. I think you have mistaken me for someone else. I remember you just fine, and your features are not easy to forget. You're a wanted wizard, one of the ugly ones, and you can just imagine my delight when I saw that you were wanted by the guild. Look who is talking. Do you think that you stand any different from me? I am your creation, and besides, I see plenty of differences. Oh, such as? I'm not a criminal. I'm not a monster who experiments on children, mutilates them, and robs them of their humanity or life. Now wait just a moment. My experiments were meant to enhance life. Sacrifices had to be made, and if my work had been left alone, then... Wait, that sword. Could it be that you are... No, it cannot be you. Well, you messed with the wrong boy. You're not getting out of here alive. You are too dangerous to be left alive. Wait just a moment. You do not understand. I'm not a nihilist as Zmyarnians are. I stand for life. I stand for betterment of life. And there was no other way to achieve that goal. Look at the strength of your body, the strength within your body, the desire in your strong heart. I gave you this. You're a success. You are what I wanted to achieve. Grezhith already had his sword ready for battle, and waiting no further, he charged the spellcaster, but not before distracting the said spellcaster with an exploding stone of light that, once violently handled, would cause a distracting and a non-lethal explosion, which gave him the opportunity to plunge his sword into the torso of his opponent. Zweihänder gazed in disbelief as his purple blood stained the blade of the sword, and in that moment his life was extinguished, and in that moment Grezhith excitedly exclaimed, "There is no greater release than that of vengeance sated. You did well, my friend. I do not care what you say, but half of the reward is yours for sure. We will take care of the details later. My friend, as I said, this was not about the coin. This was about me. This was my life's quest." Even so, now liberated Strigofor did not want to hear a word about it, for he was grateful for the assistance, and he produced a piece of paper, and he was adamant for Grezhith to take it. What was that piece of paper? The Guild of Adventurers would give this official piece of paper to an adventurer, and that paper, which held the official seal of the guild, would guarantee the adventurer the ownership of the coins from the treasury of Alqualos. There were attempts of forgery of this official document, and so far all of the attempts were unsuccessful and punished severely. Strigofor and Grezhith now seemed to be alone, for there were no soldiers of Lywada present, nor there was any sign of Zweihänder. The whole room stood as a dark void, and the upcoming dread was palpable. Unnerved, Grezhith then asked, "Why is all of this so weird now? Why am I feeling like this? My sword, say something. Say anything. Why are you silent? You must be completely crazy. You're a hero who defeated 2 major villains, and you dare act in this manner? Because of your actions, Lywada was saved, and the scheme of Zmyarnian was unveiled, and thus the expansion of Zmyarnia was halted, for now. Have you forgotten already how they cheered for you, and how you quickly became a talk of the towns? talk of the towns, only to disappear on the next adventure? You are gone now. You will never return. You had your chance to retire, but you chose this. You chose death, and you chose the adventure, which had cost you everything. Strigofor, what are you saying? What is wrong? What is going on? Why has your voice changed? Strigofor started to change shape in that moment. His entire person and clothes turned into black and yellow patterns, and he started to resemble a massive, grotesque, six-armed clown. A clown, even in this world, was a comic entertainer who used slapstick or physical humor, and often performed in a circus wearing a costume that had exaggerated colorful patterns, and the person in question would wear equally exaggerated makeup of equally colorful visage. They were also known to perform in a pantomime style, and in this world the last circus went into Zmyarnia against all reason and against all protests and against all pleading to stay away from the said nation, and thus it was never seen or heard from again. Then the multitude of floating yellow and black balloons emerged from the ground. Grezhith felt an enormous and unexplainable fear, and thus he turned around and sprinted into the opposite direction. That stood as a dark void. He had heard about the green-eyed, red-robed, hooded phantoms of the mist called Obiquesh, of whom madmen talked about, but they seemed to be imaginary creatures, products of madness, while this encounter was very much real, and that of madness incarnate. Grezhith was running, and the yellow balloons would pop and produce a sparkling kind of dust, while the black ones, once popped, produced an explosion of devastating proportions, and one of those explosions knocked Grezhith onto the black ground, which held no texture. Yellow clown-like creature appeared in front of him, and that startled Grezhith, who in that moment found himself looking like a dwarf. Much to his dismay, the yellow clown-like creature laughed at his appearance, and it was in that moment that Grezhith woke up. He woke up on the wooden floor of a large sailing ship with multiple masts and sails. Indeed, it was a beautiful vessel of large stature, and it was powered by sails as well as human labor. The vessel itself, Grezhith remembered, was used for voyages and as well as for cargo transportation of the most delicate kind. It stood as a grand majestic vessel with prominent prow that was straight and pointed, and was decorated with banners and wooden carvings of beautiful female creatures of human fantasy. The vessel now stood a shipwreck, a shadow of its beauty after what appeared to be a huge storm, with dangerous kind of calamity falling from the sky, and because of it, indeed, the debris, shredded sails, and wreckage floated on the sea. Grezhith looked around, and then he heard a familiar voice, a voice of his sword, Odanik, and thus it cheerfully said, "Did you have a nice dream?" Thank you for listening. This was the first 20 pages of the story. If you wish to learn more, if you wish to hear more, please leave a comment, like and subscribe. And if you want to have the copy of the book, please contact me. For I'm the writer, and I'm the writer, the creator, and this whole thing was my idea. And there are many more illustrations of this story, presented on my DeviantArt page. That's it for now. Have a nice day, and see you next time.